The stagecoach lurched to a halt in front of the weathered general store, and Katherine Oliverson pressed her gloved hand against the window, watching dust settle across the main street of Trinity, Texas, like a veil of copper silk in the late afternoon sun of September 1878. She stepped down onto the packed earth, her navy traveling dress already coated with a fine layer of dust from the 3-day journey from Houston. The town consisted of little more than a dozen buildings scattered along both sides of a wide dirt road, their false fronts bleached gray by the relentless sun. A saloon stood at one end, its painted sign faded beyond legibility. The general store occupied the middle ground, flanked by a blacksmith shop and what appeared to be a small boarding house. At the far end, she could make out a tiny church with a crooked cross atop its steeple. A woman approached, her calico dress worn but clean, her face lined by wind and hardship. "Miss Oliverson, I'm Margaret Hayes, head of the school board." "Well, I suppose I am the school board, truth be told." Katherine smiled and extended her hand. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Hayes. Thank you for hiring me sight unseen. We're grateful you came. The children haven't had proper schooling in nearly 2 years, not since Miss Peterson married and moved to San Antonio." Margaret gestured toward a small building Katherine had initially mistaken for a storage shed. "That's the schoolhouse. It's not much, but it's sturdy." As they walked toward the building, Katherine noticed a man standing near a hitching post, watching their approach with steady interest. He stood well over 6 feet tall, broad-shouldered in a faded blue work shirt, dusty chaps over worn denim, and a hat pulled low enough to shadow his eyes. 3 children clustered around him, 2 boys who looked to be about 8 and 10, and a girl who couldn't have been more than 6. "That's Lucas Nash," Margaret said quietly. "He's got a ranch about 5 miles west of town. Those are his children. The older boy is Samuel, middle one is Thomas, and the little one is Sarah. Their mother died in childbirth 3 years back. Sarah was the baby she was trying to bring into the world." Katherine's heart constricted. How terrible for them all. "Lucas does his best, but those children run wild as mustangs. The boys can barely write their names, and Sarah doesn't know her letters at all. He works sunup to sundown trying to keep that ranch running on his own. Can't spare much time for teaching." As they approached, the man removed his hat, revealing dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and eyes the color of strong coffee. His face was weathered and angular, with lines around his eyes that could have come from squinting into the sun or from grief, or perhaps both. "Mr. Nash, this is our new teacher, Miss Katherine Oliverson." "Madam." His voice was low and rough, like gravel tumbling in a creek bed. "These are my children. I hope they won't give you too much trouble." The 2 boys stared at her with open curiosity, but little Sarah hid behind her father's leg, peering out with enormous brown eyes. Katherine knelt down, bringing herself to Sarah's eye level. "Hello, Sarah. I'm very glad to meet you. You know what we're going to do in school? We're going to read wonderful stories about faraway places and learn to write letters and do sums. Would you like that?" Sarah didn't answer, but she stepped slightly away from her father's leg. "My boys need discipline more than stories," Lucas said, his tone not unkind but matter-of-fact. "They need to learn enough reading and ciphering to run a ranch someday. I don't expect fancy education." Katherine stood, meeting his eyes directly. "Mr. Nash, reading and arithmetic are certainly important, but education is also about learning to think, to understand the world beyond Trinity. Even ranch hands benefit from knowing their geography and history." Something flickered in his expression, though whether it was amusement or annoyance, she couldn't tell. "We'll see how long you last, Miss Oliverson. This isn't Boston or Philadelphia." "It's hot, It's dusty and most folks here are too busy surviving to worry about geography." "It's Baltimore, actually," she said crisply. "And I assure you I didn't come to Texas expecting comfort. I came to teach children who need teaching." Margaret cleared her throat. "Well then, let me show you to your quarters, Miss Oliverson. School starts Monday morning. That gives you the weekend to settle in and prepare." Katherine followed Margaret toward the boarding house, but she felt Lucas Nash's eyes on her back the entire way. When she glanced over her shoulder, he was settling his hat back on his head, his children already climbing into a weathered wagon. The boarding house was run by a widow named Mrs. Chen, whose husband had been one of the Chinese laborers who'd worked on the railroad before it bypassed Trinity entirely. She showed Katherine to a small room on the second floor with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a single window overlooking the main street. "Breakfast is at 6, supper at 6, Mrs. Chen said in accented but clear English. "You need anything else, you ask." That first weekend, Katherine explored the town and prepared her lessons. The schoolhouse was indeed small, barely 20 feet square, with rough-hewn benches that served as desks and a blackboard that had seen better days. Someone had left a crate of books in the corner, their spines cracked and pages yellowed, but Katherine examined each one with delight. A reader, an arithmetic primer, a geography text that was 20 years out of date but still useful, and wonder of wonders, a collection of Shakespeare's plays. She spent Saturday cleaning the schoolhouse, sweeping out dust and dead insects, washing the windows until they actually let light through, arranging the benches into neat rows. She wrote the alphabet across the top of the blackboard in careful letters and prepared slates for the younger children. Sunday, she attended services at the small church, where a circuit preacher delivered a sermon on patience and perseverance. The congregation numbered perhaps 30 people, including Lucas Nash and his children. The boys fidgeted throughout the service, and Sarah fell asleep against her father's shoulder. Lucas held her carefully, his large hand protective on her small back, and Katherine found herself studying his profile, the tenderness in his expression when he looked at his sleeping daughter. After the service, several families introduced themselves. She met the Hendersons, who had 4 children, the Williams family with their twin daughters, old Mr. Cooper, whose grandson lived with him, and several others. All expressed gratitude that she'd come and hoped that she'd stay longer than the previous teachers. "How many teachers have there been?" Katherine asked Margaret. "4 in the last 5 years. 2 left because they couldn't handle the isolation. 1 married. And Miss Peterson, well, she did her best, but she wasn't really trained for teaching." Monday morning arrived bright and clear. Katherine reached the schoolhouse at 7:30 to find a dozen children already waiting, ranging in age from Sarah Nash's 6 years to a gangly boy of 14 who introduced himself as Robert Cooper. She counted heads. 18 students total, more than she'd expected for such a small town. "Good morning," she said, standing before them in a crisp white shirtwaist and dark skirt, her blonde hair pulled back in a neat bun. "My name is Miss Oliverson, and I'm very pleased to meet all of you. We're going to begin by going around and having each of you tell me your name and age." The morning passed in a flurry of assessment as she determined each child's level of learning. The results were sobering. Of the 18 students, only 5 could read at grade level. Most knew basic arithmetic but struggled with anything beyond simple sums. Several of the younger children didn't know their letters at all. At midday, the children ate lunches they'd brought from home, sitting in the shade of the building. Katherine noticed that Sarah Nash's lunch consisted of a biscuit and a piece of jerky, while her brothers had the same. Simple fare, but the children ate without complaint. The afternoon session focused on reading. She started the older children on a passage from the reader while working with the younger ones on letter recognition. Sarah proved to be bright, quickly learning to identify several letters and even beginning to sound out simple words. By the time she dismissed the children at 3 o'clock, Catherine's head ached and her voice was hoarse, but she felt a deep satisfaction. This was work that mattered. She was erasing the blackboard when she heard footsteps at the door. Lucas Nash stood in the entrance, hat in hand, backlit by the afternoon sun. "Mr. Nash, the children left about 15 minutes ago." "I know. I saw them heading back. I wanted to talk to you without them overhearing." He stepped inside, and she noticed how the small room seemed to shrink with his presence. "Sarah hasn't stopped talking about you since Sunday. That's saying something for a child who barely speaks most days. She's a very bright little girl. With proper instruction, she'll be reading fluently within a few months." "That's fine, but I need to make something clear." He turned his hat in his hands, a gesture that might have seemed nervous on another man but on him simply seemed thoughtful. "My boys need practical education. They need to read well enough to understand a land deed or a bill of sale. They need to cipher well enough to keep accounts and calculate head of cattle. Beyond that, I don't want their heads filled with fancy ideas that'll make them discontent with ranch life." Katherine set down the eraser carefully, keeping her voice calm. "Mr. Nash, are you telling me how to teach? I'm telling you what my children need. And I'm telling you that I will teach them according to the standards of good education. If they develop interests beyond ranching, surely that's their right to choose when they're grown." His jaw tightened. "Their place is on the ranch. It's their inheritance, their future. I won't have them turned into soft-handed clerks who can't rope a steer or mend a fence." Education and practical skills aren't mutually exclusive. Your sons can learn literature and still know how to work cattle. Sarah can study geography and still learn to cook and sew. Why would you want to limit their potential? Because potential doesn't feed a family or keep a ranch running. Hard work does. Practical knowledge does. He stepped closer, and she caught the scent of leather and sage and something else, something wholly masculine that made her pulse quicken despite her annoyance. "I respect what you're trying to do, Miss Oliverson, but you're an outsider. You don't understand how life works out here. Then perhaps you could explain it to me instead of assuming I'm too simple to understand." Their eyes met and held. The moment stretched taut between them, crackling with tension that had nothing to do with anger and everything to do with the sudden awareness of proximity, of his height and breadth, of the way his gaze dropped briefly to her mouth before returning to her eyes. He stepped back abruptly. "The children will be here tomorrow. I expect they'll learn what they need to learn." After he left, Katherine sank onto one of the benches, her heart beating too fast. She'd dealt with difficult parents before, but none had ever affected her quite like Lucas Nash. There was something about him, something in his eyes that spoke of depths beyond the gruff exterior, something in the careful way he spoke of his children that told her his hardness came from love and fear rather than cruelty. The first week of school established a routine. The children arrived each morning, some walking from town, others delivered by parents from outlying ranches. Katherine divided them into 3 groups based on ability, rotating between lessons in reading, writing, and arithmetic. She supplemented the basic curriculum with geography, teaching them about other states and countries and history, telling them stories of how Texas had fought for independence and joined the Union. The Nash children were a study in contrasts. Samuel, the oldest at 10, was serious and diligent, carefully forming his letters and working through arithmetic problems with furrowed concentration. Thomas, at 8, was quicker but more careless, often making silly mistakes because he rushed through his work. And Sarah was a sponge, absorbing everything Katherine taught with an eagerness that was deeply rewarding. Friday afternoon, as Katherine was helping Sarah sound out words, the little girl looked up at her with solemn eyes. "Do you like my papa?" The question caught Katherine off guard. "I don't know your father very well, Sarah, but he seems like a good man who cares about his children very much. He's sad sometimes. At night when he thinks we're sleeping, I hear him walking around. Mama's gone and I think he misses her." Katherine's throat tightened. "I'm sure he does. Losing someone you love is very hard. Do you think he could be happy again? I think your father finds happiness in you and your brothers, and perhaps in time the sadness will be less heavy." Sarah nodded thoughtfully and returned to her reading. That evening, Katherine sat in her room at the boarding house, writing a letter to her sister in Baltimore. She described the town, the school, the children, but found herself dwelling on Lucas Nash longer than she should. There was something compelling about him, about the contradiction between his rough exterior and the evident tenderness he showed his children, about the intelligence she glimpsed beneath his insistence on purely practical education. The second week brought a challenge from an unexpected quarter. Robert Cooper, the 14-year-old boy, began making trouble. He talked back during lessons, deliberately gave wrong answers to questions she knew he could answer correctly, and encouraged the younger boys to misbehavior. Wednesday afternoon, after he disrupted the reading lesson for the third time, Katherine asked him to stay after school. "Mr. Cooper, I'd like to understand what's troubling you. You're clearly intelligent, but you're wasting your potential and interfering with the other students' learning." He slouched on the bench, arms crossed. "I shouldn't even be here. I'm 14. I should be working, earning money, not sitting in a schoolroom with little kids." "Why aren't you working? My grandfather says I need more education. But what's the point? I'm not going to be a lawyer or a teacher. I'm going to work cattle, same as every other man in Trinity. And you think education is wasted on a cattleman? I think I already know how to read and cipher. That's all I need." Katherine pulled a chair over and sat facing him. "Robert, can you tell me what the capital of Nebraska is?" He blinked. "No." "Do you know what year the war between the states ended? Sometime in the 60s, I guess. Do you know how to calculate interest on a loan?" He shifted uncomfortably. "Not exactly. Then you don't know everything you need to know, not yet." She leaned forward. "Here's what I propose. I'll give you more challenging work, assignments suited to your age and ability. In exchange, you'll set an example of good behavior for the younger students. Does that seem fair?" He considered this. "What kind of assignments?" "Advanced arithmetic, including percentages and basic algebra. Essays on historical topics, geography of the entire United States, not just Texas. Things that will genuinely prepare you for adult life. And if I don't want to, then you'll continue to be bored and disruptive, and eventually I'll have to speak to your grandfather about removing you from school. But I don't think you want that. I think you're smart enough to recognize that knowledge is power, even if you're not sure how to use that power yet." Something shifted in his expression. "My grandfather wants me to take over his land someday. He's got 200 acres and he's the only one running it since my pa died. I guess knowing about loans and such might be useful." "I guarantee it will be." After that, Robert became her ally. He helped the younger children with their lessons, set an example of attentiveness, and worked through the advanced materials she prepared for him with growing enthusiasm. Lucas noticed the change when he came to collect his children Friday afternoon. "Robert Cooper looks like a different boy." "What did you do to him?" I challenged him. "People rarely rise to low expectations, Mr. Nash, but they often rise to high ones." He studied her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "My boys say you told them stories today about the Alamo." They couldn't stop talking about it at midday when I brought them fresh water. History shouldn't be dry facts and dates. It should be stories that help us understand who we are and where we came from. Samuel asked me if I knew any men who fought in the war, wanted to know what I did during it. And what did you tell him? That I was too young to fight. I was only 10 when it ended, but my father fought, died at Shiloh when I was 7. He paused. I never told the children that before. They've never asked. Perhaps they were never encouraged to be curious about such things. His gaze sharpened. You think I don't encourage my children? I think you love your children and want the best for them. I also think you're so focused on preparing them for the practical challenges of life that you might be overlooking the importance of feeding their minds and imaginations. Their minds and imaginations won't keep them alive in a drought or through a hard winter. No, but they might give them the creativity to solve problems you haven't anticipated, the knowledge to find new opportunities, the wisdom to make good decisions. She softened her tone. Mr. Nash, I'm not criticizing you. You've clearly done a remarkable job raising 3 children alone while running a ranch, but that's exactly why they need school. Because you can't teach them everything and neither can I. Together, though, we might give them what they need to thrive. He was quiet for a long moment. You don't back down, do you? Not when it comes to education or to children. I can see that. He called to his children who came running. As they climbed into the wagon, he turned back to her. Miss Oliverson, would you come to Sunday dinner after church? The children have been asking, and I'd like to show you that ranch life isn't just hard work and no learning. The invitation surprised her. I wouldn't want to impose. It's not an imposition if you're invited. Sarah's been practicing her letters every night, and she wants to show you what she can write. Besides, you should see where the children come from, how they live. Might help you understand what I've been trying to say. Katherine hesitated, knowing she should probably maintain professional distance. But curiosity won. Thank you, Mr. Nash. I'd be pleased to come. Sunday arrived warm and clear. After the church service, Katherine rode out to the Nash ranch in the wagon, seated between Samuel and Thomas while Sarah chattered away on her father's lap up front. The ranch lay 5 miles west of town, accessible by a rutted road that wound through scrub brush and mesquite trees. The house was smaller than Katherine had expected, a simple wooden structure with a covered porch and a stone chimney. A barn stood to one side, corrals beyond it holding several horses and a small herd of cattle. The land stretched away in rolling hills covered with brown grass, broken by occasional live oak trees. Inside, the house was spare but clean. The main room served as kitchen and living area, with a stone fireplace at one end and a worn table with mismatched chairs in the center. 2 doorways led to what she assumed were bedrooms. It's not much, Lucas said, a hint of defensiveness in his voice. It's a home, Katherine said simply. That's everything. He relaxed slightly. Dinner won't be fancy, I'm no cook. But the meal he served, beef stew with vegetables and fresh biscuits, was hearty and well prepared. As they ate, the children told Katherine about the ranch, about helping with chores, about the new calf that had been born last week. Sarah showed Katherine the letters she'd been practicing, carefully formed on a precious sheet of paper. After dinner, Lucas showed Katherine around the property while the children did their chores. They walked past the barn, where he pointed out the milk cow and the chickens, past the corral where several horses watched with mild interest, and out toward a fenced pasture. This was my father's land, he said. He bought it in 1855, built the house with his own hands. When he died, my mother tried to keep it running, but it was too much. She moved to Houston to live with her sister when I was 12, left the ranch to me. I've been working it ever since. You were only 12, old enough to know cattle and horses. The neighbors helped some, and I hired hands when I could afford it. When I married Margaret, she helped run the house, kept the books, made it feel like a real home again. His voice roughened. Then she died, and I had to figure out how to do it all again, but this time with 3 children depending on me. Margaret, like Mrs. Hayes. No relation, just coincidence. My Margaret was from San Antonio. We met when I drove cattle there to sell. She was beautiful and smart, and I couldn't believe she agreed to marry me and move out here to the middle of nowhere. Katherine watched his profile, saw the grief that still lived in the set of his shoulders. The children clearly loved her very much. Sarah never knew her, not really. She was only a few days old when Margaret died. The boys remember, though. Sometimes I hear Samuel telling Sarah stories about her mother, trying to keep her alive in his sister's memory. They walked in silence for a while, the wind carrying the scent of sage and dust. In the distance, a hawk circled lazily against the blue sky. "I owe you an apology," Lucas said abruptly. "I've been hard on you, questioning your methods, acting like I know better. Truth is, I'm scared. Scared of what? That they'll get ideas about leaving. That they'll want more than this ranch can offer. That I'll lose them the way I lost their mother." He stopped walking, turned to face her. "This land is all I have to give them. It's their security, their future. If they develop grand ambitions beyond ranching, what happens to this place? What happens to everything my father built, everything I've worked for? Mr. Nash, education doesn't mean they'll leave. It means they'll have choices. Maybe Samuel will become the best rancher in Trinity because he understands weather patterns and agricultural science. Maybe Thomas will expand the ranch because he learned business principles. Maybe Sarah will marry well and bring her family back here to help run things. Or maybe one of them will choose a different path, but they'll choose it freely, not because it's the only option they know. And if they all leave, then you'll know you raised children who could stand on their own, who could make their own way in the world. Isn't that what every parent wants?" He studied her face, his dark eyes searching. "You're wise beyond your years, Miss Oliverson. How old are you, if you don't mind my asking?" 22. "And you?" 28. "Sometimes I feel 50. He smiled slightly, and it transformed his face, softening the hard lines, bringing warmth to his eyes. "You make me think about things differently. I don't know if I like it. Change is uncomfortable, but it's also how we grow." They turned back toward the house, and Katherine found herself acutely aware of his presence beside her, the way his stride matched hers, the occasional brush of his arm against her sleeve. There was something developing between them, something that went beyond disagreements about education or professional courtesy. She felt it in the way he looked at her, in the way her pulse quickened when he smiled, in the comfortable silence that had fallen between them. As they reached the house, Sarah came running out. "Papa, can Miss Oliverson see my room? I cleaned it special. If Miss Oliverson doesn't mind." Katherine followed Sarah into the small bedroom the girl shared with her brothers. 3 narrow beds lined the walls, and a battered trunk held their few belongings. But the room was neat, and Sarah had arranged her slate and precious paper on an upturned crate that served as a desk. "This is where I practice my letters every night," Sarah said proudly. "Samuel helps me sometimes when I get stuck." Katherine's heart swelled. These children, living in this small house in the middle of nowhere, hungry for knowledge, working so hard. She understood Lucas's protectiveness, his desire to give them security. But she also saw their potential, bright and unlimited if given the chance to develop. As the sun began to set, Lucas drove Katherine back to town. The children were tired, Sarah asleep against Katherine's side, the boys drowsing in the back of the wagon. "Thank you for coming today," Lucas said quietly. It meant a lot to the children, to all of us. Thank you for inviting me. It helped me understand them better and you. Katherine, he said, and the sound of her given name in his deep voice sent warmth through her. Would it be improper if I called on you sometime? Not as a parent checking on his children's education, but as a man interested in knowing you better, her breath caught. I don't think it would be improper at all, Lucas. He smiled, that same transforming smile she'd seen earlier. Good. Because I haven't been able to stop thinking about you since you stepped off that stagecoach 3 weeks ago. The weeks that followed fell into a pattern that brought Katherine more happiness than she'd known in years. During the day, she taught, watching with deep satisfaction as the children's skills grew. Samuel was reading at a level well beyond his age, and she'd started him on more advanced texts. Thomas showed an aptitude for mathematics that surprised everyone, including himself. Sarah was sounding out simple sentences and begging for new books. 3 evenings a week, Lucas would come to town after finishing his work, cleaned up and with his hat in hand, to walk with Katherine or sit on the porch of the boarding house and talk until the stars came out. They talked about everything: his childhood on the ranch, her upbringing in Baltimore, his hopes for his children, her dreams of making a real difference through teaching. He told her about his wife, about the joy and the grief of those years, about the terror of being left alone with 3 children and a ranch to run. She told him about her family, about the expectations she'd fled by coming west, about her mother's horror when she'd announced she wanted to teach rather than make a suitable marriage. "What would your mother think of me?" Lucas asked one evening as they sat on the porch, watching fireflies dance in the darkness. "She'd think you were entirely unsuitable," Katherine said honestly. "Wrong profession, wrong part of the country, wrong everything by her standards. And what do you think?" She turned to look at him, at his strong profile in the lamplight spilling through the window. "I think you're the best man I've ever known. Hardworking, honest, devoted to your children, kind even when you're trying to be stern, and more intelligent than you give yourself credit for." He reached for her hand, his calloused palm warm against hers. "I'm falling in love with you, Katherine. I know it's too soon. I know you might think I'm just lonely or looking for a mother for my children, but it's more than that. You've made me think about the world differently, made me remember that there's more to life than just surviving. When I'm with you, I feel alive again." Her eyes stung with tears. "I'm falling in love with you too. I didn't expect it, didn't plan for it. I came here to teach, and instead I found something I didn't even know I was looking for." He stood, drawing her up with him, and kissed her gently, reverently, as if she were something precious and fragile. When they parted, he rested his forehead against hers. "I don't have much to offer. The ranch does well enough, but we'll never be wealthy. Life out here is hard, but I can promise you I'll love you with everything I have, and I'll do my best to make you happy. Lucas, I didn't come west looking for wealth or ease. I came looking for purpose and meaning. I found both in teaching, and now I've found love as well. That's more than most people get in a lifetime." Through October and into November, their courtship deepened. Lucas proposed properly, with a ring that had belonged to his mother, on Thanksgiving evening after a dinner shared with his children. They were gathered in the ranch house, the table laden with roasted chicken and vegetables, and pie that Katherine had helped the children prepare. After the meal, Lucas cleared his throat. "Children, I have something important to ask, and I need your opinion. You know that Miss Oliverson has been coming to Sunday dinner and that I've been calling on her in town." "You're in love," Sarah said matter-of-factly. "I can tell because you smile more." Samuel and Thomas nodded agreement. Lucas laughed, a sound Katherine had heard more frequently in recent weeks. "Yes, I'm in love, and I'd like to ask Miss Oliverson to marry me to become part of our family, but only if you three approve. This isn't just about me, it's about all of us. Will you still be our teacher? Samuel asked Katherine. I'll teach at the school as long as the town wants me, but I'd also be your stepmother if you'll have me. Will you tell us more stories? Thomas wanted to know. About history and faraway places. Every night if you'd like. Sarah climbed down from her chair and came to Katherine, wrapping her small arms around her waist. I'd like a mama, and I think my real mama would like you. Papa says she was smart and kind, just like you. Katherine's vision blurred with tears. She looked at Lucas and found his eyes equally bright. So, he said, his voice rough with emotion, what do you say, Katherine? Will you marry me? Will you take on a rough cowboy and 3 children and a ranch that needs more work than one person can give it? Yes, she said simply. Yes to all of it. They married in the small church in Trinity on a cold December morning with the whole town in attendance. Katherine wore a simple dress of ivory silk that Mrs. Chen had helped her sew, and Lucas wore his best suit, looking uncomfortable but handsome. Samuel, Thomas, and Sarah stood with them, solemn and proud. Margaret Hayes cried, and afterward she hugged Katherine tightly. I'm so happy for you, for all of you. Those children needed a mother, and Lucas needed someone to bring joy back into his life. But please tell me you'll keep teaching. I will. Lucas and I talked about it. The children can do their chores before and after school, and I'll help with the ranch work during the summer when school is out. We'll make it work. And they did. Katherine moved into the ranch house, bringing her few belongings and her many books. She rearranged the main room to create a corner for studying, where she and the children would spend evenings reading together. She learned to cook heartier meals, to preserve vegetables for winter, to help with the endless tasks that ranch life demanded. But she also kept teaching, rising before dawn to prepare lessons, riding into town in the wagon with the children each morning, returning in the afternoon to tackle ranch chores alongside Lucas. It was exhausting work, but deeply fulfilling. Lucas, true to his word, proved to be a devoted husband. He was tender and passionate, making Katherine feel cherished in a way she'd never experienced. But more than that, he was her partner, valuing her opinions, discussing ranch decisions with her, encouraging her teaching even when it meant extra work for him. And he was learning. That was the surprise that touched Katherine most deeply. After the children went to bed, Lucas began asking her to teach him things he'd never learned. Geography first, because he wanted to understand the places she described to the children. Then history, because he realized how much context he'd been missing. Then literature, reading aloud together from her books, discussing the stories and what they meant. I was wrong. He told her one evening in January as they sat by the fire, a volume of poetry open between them. I thought practical knowledge was all that mattered, but you've shown me that understanding the world, understanding ideas and beauty and truth, that's practical too. It makes life richer. It makes me richer, not in money but in here. He pressed a hand to his chest. You were never uneducated, Lucas. You just hadn't had the opportunity to explore certain kinds of knowledge, but you have a quick mind and a hunger to learn. That's all education really requires. He pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. I learn more from you every day than my children do, I think. Not just book learning, but how to be patient, how to see potential instead of limitations, how to hope for things I'd stopped letting myself hope for. Winter gave way to spring, and the ranch began to thrive in new ways. Lucas, inspired by a geography lesson on irrigation, experimented with water management techniques that improved the grazing land. Samuel, applying mathematics to ranch problems, developed a better system for tracking cattle. Even Thomas and Sarah contributed, their increased literacy allowing them to help with correspondence and record keeping. In April, Katherine realized she was pregnant. The discovery filled her with joy and terror in equal measure. She remembered what had happened to Lucas's first wife, the danger of childbirth, the possibility of leaving Lucas widowed again and her stepchildren motherless. When she told him, she saw fear flash in his eyes too, but he gathered her into his arms and held her close. "We'll get through this. I'll take you to San Antonio when the time comes. Make sure you have the best doctor available. I can't lose you, Katherine. You've become my whole world." "I'm frightened," she admitted. "So am I, but we'll face it together." The children were thrilled at the prospect of a new sibling. Sarah immediately began planning what she would teach the baby, while the boys argued about whether they wanted a brother or sister. As Katherine's pregnancy progressed, the community rallied around them. The women of Trinity brought food and offered advice. Mrs. Hayes arranged for a substitute teacher to take over when Katherine's time grew near. Even Robert Cooper, now 15 and working his grandfather's land, stopped by to wish them well and thank Katherine for the education that had prepared him for his future. In September, exactly 1 year after Katherine had arrived in Trinity, she went into labor. True to his word, Lucas had taken her to San Antonio 2 weeks earlier, renting rooms near a doctor with an excellent reputation. The birth was long and difficult, but Katherine was young and strong, and the doctor was skilled. She gave birth to a healthy baby boy as the sun rose over San Antonio. They named him James, after Lucas's father. When Lucas held his son for the first time, tears streamed down his face. "Thank you," he whispered to Katherine. "Thank you for this gift, for coming into our lives, for making us whole again." They returned to the ranch to find the house cleaned and decorated, a feast prepared by the townswomen, and the 3 older children wild with excitement to meet their new brother. Life settled into a new rhythm. Katherine returned to teaching part-time, with Mrs. Chen helping care for baby James during school hours. The older children continued to excel, and several other families, seeing their progress, committed to keeping their own children in school longer. Lucas continued his own education, reading voraciously, discussing ideas with Katherine late into the night. He began attending school board meetings, advocating for better resources, even contributing money from the ranch profits to buy new books and materials. 2 years after James was born, Katherine gave birth to a daughter they named Grace. By then, Samuel was 13 and talking about maybe becoming a teacher himself someday, though he still loved ranch work. Thomas, at 11, showed interest in veterinary medicine after helping save a sick calf. Sarah, at 9, was reading at a level that astonished everyone and writing stories of her own. The ranch prospered, partly because of Lucas's hard work, but also because education had opened new possibilities. They diversified, adding sheep to their cattle, experimenting with new crops in irrigated fields, even selling horses that Samuel had trained using techniques he'd read about in a book Katherine had ordered from Houston. On a warm evening in May 1884, Katherine stood on the porch of the ranch house, watching the sun set over the hills. Lucas came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist, careful not to disturb baby Grace sleeping in the sling across Katherine's chest. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "About how different my life is from what I imagined. When I left Baltimore, I thought I was just coming to teach at a frontier school. I never dreamed I'd find a family, a home, a love this deep. I never dreamed I'd love again after Margaret died. I thought that part of my life was over, and then you stepped off that stagecoach, prim and proper and determined, and you turned everything upside down. I wasn't prim and proper. You absolutely were. You still are sometimes when you're correcting someone's grammar." He kissed her neck, making her shiver. "But you're also passionate and brave and strong. You took on 3 grieving children and a stubborn cowboy and made us into a real family again." Samuel called from inside the house, something about Thomas taking his book, and they heard Sarah's patient voice mediating the dispute. Katherine laughed. "Some things never change, and some things change everything." Lucas turned her in his arms to face him. "You changed everything, Katherine. You taught me more than my children ever learned in your school. You taught me how to live again, how to love again, how to see beyond survival to actually thriving. You taught me that education isn't about facts and figures. It's about opening minds and hearts to possibility. And you taught me that love isn't something you plan for or expect. It's something that finds you when you're brave enough to take a risk, go somewhere new, open yourself to what's possible." They kissed as the sun painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson, the sounds of their children's laughter drifting from the house, the vast Texas landscape stretching away in every direction, full of promise and possibility. Inside, Samuel had resolved the dispute over the book by suggesting they read it aloud together. Sarah was setting the table for supper while James, now 3, helped by rearranging the silverware into patterns. The house smelled of baking bread and the wildflowers Katherine had picked that morning. This was home. This was family. This was the life Katherine had built not through careful planning but through courage, through love, through the simple act of stepping off a stagecoach in a dusty town and deciding to stay. As the years passed, the Nash family became a cornerstone of Trinity. The ranch continued to prosper, expanding to include 500 acres. Samuel did indeed become a teacher, taking over the school when Katherine decided to focus on raising her younger children and teaching part-time. He brought the same dedication to education that his stepmother had shown, inspiring a new generation of students. Thomas pursued his interest in animal medicine, apprenticing with a veterinarian in San Antonio before returning to Trinity to serve the ranching community. His scientific approach to animal care, combined with practical knowledge from growing up on a ranch, made him invaluable to local farmers and ranchers. Sarah's love of reading and writing led her to become a journalist, contributing articles to newspapers in Houston and San Antonio about life on the frontier. She eventually married a newspaper editor and divided her time between the city and the ranch. But she never forgot the woman who taught her that a girl from a small Texas town could dream beyond the horizon. James grew up surrounded by books and cattle in equal measure, eventually taking over the ranch with his father and expanding it into one of the most successful operations in the region. Grace, the baby Katherine had worried over, became a doctor, one of the first women to practice medicine in Texas, inspired by her mother's belief that education opened all doors. Lucas and Katherine's love deepened with each passing year. They built a larger house as their family grew, but they kept the original building as a library and study, a reminder of where they'd started. They hosted gatherings for the community, combining ranch hospitality with intellectual discourse, creating a space where cowboys and teachers, ranchers and artists could meet and learn from each other. Lucas never stopped learning. At 40, he could discuss philosophy and literature with the same ease he discussed cattle and land management. He credited Katherine with giving him a second education, but she always insisted he'd taught himself. She'd merely opened the door. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Lucas gave Katherine a gift that made her cry: a school named in her honor. He'd worked with the town council and contributed significant funds to build a proper schoolhouse with multiple rooms, a real library, and living quarters for teachers. The Oliverson School would serve Trinity and the surrounding ranches, ensuring that future generations had access to quality education. "You gave me everything," he said as they stood together at the dedication ceremony, their children and grandchildren gathered around. "You gave me love and family and a reason to reach beyond what I thought possible. This is my thank you, though it's inadequate for what you've given me." Katherine touched his weathered face, still handsome despite the years, still beloved. "Lucas, you gave me just as much. You gave me a home, a family, a purpose beyond what I'd imagined. You learned from me, yes, but I learned from you too. You taught me about resilience and courage, about love that endures through hardship, about building something meaningful with your own hands. We taught each other then. We did, and we're still teaching each other every day." They stood together as the community gathered to celebrate the new school, children running and playing, adults talking and laughing, the afternoon sun warm on their faces. In the distance, the ranch spread across the hills, testament to hard work and love. And at their sides, their children and grandchildren represented the fruits of education and opportunity, each one carving their own path but rooted in the values Katherine and Lucas had built together. This was the legacy of a schoolteacher who'd come to a frontier town, expecting only to teach children their letters, and instead found a love that transformed not just her life, but an entire community. This was the legacy of a cowboy who'd thought he knew all he needed to know, but discovered that learning, like love, was a lifelong journey. As the sun set on the dedication ceremony and families began to head home, Katherine and Lucas walked back to their ranch house hand in hand, the same way they'd walked together for 20 years. Their youngest grandchild, Samuel's son, ran ahead of them while Grace's daughter held Katherine's free hand, chattering about what she wanted to learn when she started school. "You ever regret it?" Lucas asked quietly. "Leaving Baltimore, leaving the life you could have had?" Katherine looked at him, at the life they'd built together, at the family surrounding them, at the vast Texas sky painted in shades of purple and gold. "Not for a single moment. This is exactly where I was meant to be. With you, with our family in this place we've made our own. I love you, Katherine Nash. And I love you, Lucas Nash. Today, tomorrow, and always." They reached the house as twilight settled over the land, and Katherine paused at the door to look back at the view she'd seen every evening for 2 decades. The land, the sky, the endless horizon. It had all seemed so foreign when she'd first arrived, so different from everything she'd known. But now it was home in a way Baltimore had never been, because this was where she'd found not just a place but a purpose, not just a job but a calling, not just a husband but a true partner in every sense of the word. Inside, the house was warm and welcoming, filled with the sounds and smells of family. Tomorrow, Katherine would return to teaching, helping prepare lessons for the new school. Lucas would continue running the ranch with James's help. Their other children would pursue their own paths, but they'd always return here, to this place that Katherine and Lucas had built with love and hard work and faith in each other. This was their happily ever after, not a fairy tale ending but something better. A real life, built day by day, challenge by challenge, joy by joy. A life where a schoolteacher and a cowboy had found each other against all odds and created something beautiful together. As they gathered around the dinner table that evening, 3 generations joined in conversation and laughter. Katherine caught Lucas's eye across the room. He smiled at her, that same transforming smile that had first made her heart flutter years ago, and she smiled back, knowing that of all the things she'd taught and all the things she'd learned, the most important lesson was this: love, real love, wasn't about perfection or ease. It was about partnership, about two people choosing each other every day, about building something together that was stronger than what either could build alone. And in that moment, surrounded by the family they'd created and the life they'd built, Katherine knew that she'd found exactly what she'd been searching for when she stepped off that stagecoach in Trinity, Texas, all those years ago. She'd found home.